Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Good evening. Welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Katie O'Donnell. I'm an event staffer here at Politics and Prose, where we're back to hosting in-person events along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. We've also recently relocated both of our branch locations at Union Market and the Wharf and have started hosting events there as well. So for a full list of everything that we have available, you can go to our website at politics-prose.com. So before we get started today, just a few boring items. If everyone can please just go ahead and silence your cell phones. That way it's not the one wayward phone that's ringing during the program. We will be doing a Q&A during tonight's session. We have a microphone placed here. It's hidden for most of you. It's behind this pillar. So we do ask that if you're able to, come to the microphone to ask your questions. That way it can be captured in our audio and video recording of tonight. And that way everybody in the audience can clearly hear your questions. And then after tonight's program concludes, we will be doing a signing line. Debbie will be up here signing books. The pillar will again be the starting point for the line. We'll come around and ask for personalizations. So without further ado, on to the better part of this introduction. I'm really excited to introduce tonight Debbie Hines to discuss her new book, Get Off My Neck, Black Lives, White Justice, and a Former Prosecutor's Quest for Reform. In Get Off My Neck, Debbie Hines draws on her unique perspective as a trial lawyer, former Baltimore prosecutor, and assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland to argue that U.S. prosecutors, as the most powerful players in the criminal justice system, systematically target and criminalize Black people. Hines describes her disillusionment as a young Black woman who initially entered the profession with the goal of helping victims of crimes, only to discover herself aiding and abetting a system that prizes plea bargaining, speedy conviction, and excessive punishment above all else. In this book, she offers concrete, specific, and hopeful solutions for just how we can come together in a common purpose for criminal justice and racial justice reform. Former Baltimore prosecutor, assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland, and trial attorney Debbie Hines is an advocate for racial equity in the criminal justice system. She maintains a private law practice focused on civil and criminal litigation in Washington, D.C. As a leading voice in the discourse for criminal justice and race, Hines is often called on by media networks for legal commentary. Hines will be in conversation this evening with Bramante Bryant. Bryant is a journalist who has spent 3 decades covering news and sports as a reporter and anchor. He currently serves as a reporter and host for WHUR-FM 96.3, and he also hosts special programs on WHUT-TV in Washington, D.C. Besides a love of journalism, Bramante is passionate about history and transmits that zeal to students at Prince George's Community College as an adjunct professor of African American and American history. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Debbie Hines and Bramante Bryant to Politics and Prose.
Mic check. I hear myself.
Okay.
Mic checks. I just do it for myself.
So I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out tonight. I'm so excited to see. I see a lot of new faces and faces that I've known for a while, and it's just wonderful to see everyone. My backstory for being here is I lived for 13 years not even 4 blocks from here, 5406 Connecticut Avenue. And so I have literally been in Politics and Prose for probably hundreds of times and seen many book talks as a participant. So this is just really wonderful to come back, what I consider to come back home here to Politics and Prose. And so I'm just really, really happy to be here and glad that everyone came out. I thought that how I could start is just reading a very, very, very small snippet from the introduction of the book, just to kind of get us a little bit more acclimated, and then my fellow moderator, Bramante, is going to take over. So let me get myself situated here. And again, this is just a few paragraphs from the introduction. On a cold, icy, late December afternoon in 2022, I sat in a vehicle driven by Sam, a naturalized citizen who came to the United States as an immigrant from Pakistan. and now owns a car service company. As we engaged in conversation, Sam talked about how America is a country where everyone has the same opportunities to advance. He talked about how he came to this country with few resources and now owns a fleet of vehicles. Sam said that he believes that in the United States, every person, regardless of race, can dream and work to turn those dreams into reality. As Sam told his personal story of success, I remained silent. It was Christmas Eve, and hardly a good time for a challenging discussion. But I strongly disagreed with him, and on another day, I might have told Sam how his experiences differ from those of many African Americans. I wish I could have told Sam about my experiences as a former prosecutor and the experiences of my family, neighbors, and clients charged with crimes whose lives were upended due to a racially biased prosecutorial system. I would have explained to Sam how, by design, the power of the prosecutor perpetrates racial disparities against African Americans in the criminal justice system. Often overlooked in the conversation about reforming the justice system is the pressing need to reform state prosecutorial offices, the most powerful institution in criminal justice. Prosecutors, tell I'm more used to talking than reading. Prosecutors control all aspects of a criminal case. Very little happens in the criminal justice system without the prosecutor, whose hand is felt in every aspect of the system. The prosecutor decides whether to take a case before a grand jury for indictment, decides on a plea bargain, whether to go to trial or to use another method to end a case, and recommends whether to release an individual before trial on bail. The prosecutor prosecutes a case to obtain the desired goal of conviction, recommends the length of a person's sentence or probation, and participates in all aspects of post-conviction proceedings. Prosecutors are front and center in all aspects of a criminal case, and judges often rubber stamp their recommendations. The United States has the largest criminal justice system in the world, and within that system, disproportionate numbers of black children and youth are arrested, charged, and entered into prison every day before they are old enough to drive. 1 out of every black boys born in 2001 can expect to be imprisoned in their lifetime, compared to 1 in 17 white boys. Police arrest black people 10 times more frequently than they arrest white people. On a national level, police search the vehicles of black people more often than they search white people's vehicles, despite the fact that white people are more likely to have unregistered weapons or illegal drugs. Unarmed black people who present with minimum to no threat to police are killed 3 times more often than whites, even though black Americans are less likely than any other race to resist the police. Rarely do prosecutors charge police officers for killing unarmed black people. The most atrocious sentences are imposed by the death penalty. 44% of all people on death row since 1976 are black people. The colorblind justice system in America is actually color-coded.
Quite a beginning to this conversation. First of all, thank you all for having me. Thank Politics and Prose for having me as the moderator for what I believe is a very important conversation, very important book. I do want to add just a little bit about my intro. I also teach at Howard University, so I better give a shout out to them as an adjunct. So I just want to do that. Debbie, let's begin with, first of all, each chapter of your book, there's a heading with quotes. And you quote Mark Twain, you quote Toni Morrison, you quote John Lewis, you quote James Baldwin, Thurgood Marshall, Ida B. Wells. And in the introduction, you paraphrase from 1 Corinthians There but for the grace of God go I. So I'm going to guess about the motivation for your book, but I'm not going to speak on it, and I'll let you talk about that, the motivation and the inspiration for writing this book.
So that's a lot, but the motivation for me writing the book is really my mom. Both of my parents came to ultimately come to Baltimore, but they came as a part of the Great Migration, where they both lived in the South, and they came, my father from Georgia, Watley, Georgia, and my mom from Mount Gilead, North Carolina, to come to the North so they could have a better life. Both of my parents only completed the 9th grade in terms of formal education. But my mom, who is really my motivation and my inspiration, was the smartest person I know. She just didn't have a formal education. And what she always taught me and my brother was that knowledge is key. It's very important to get knowledge about anything. And it was also very important for her and my dad to make sure that me and my brother, that we actually had the education that we have. But in terms of my mom, and this does parallel with the book, I'm trying to short end it, my mom never put labels on herself, but my mom, if you were looking at her today and she's passed, she had a disability. She was born with elephantiasis, which if any of you know, this is a short version because this is what she would say, that her right leg, she was born with her right leg much larger than her left leg, which is how she got to Baltimore because of Johns Hopkins Hospital. Told you about her education, but in her lifetime, I saw how someone that had a lack of formal education, who had an illness that was lifelong, really, how she went from being a domestic worker, because that's all that she knew how to do when she came to Baltimore. My father was a laborer in the steel mill. She took what she had in terms of coming from her background. She was a sharecropper. That's how she ended up leaving Mount Gilead, North Carolina. She came and she became active in the PTA at my school because of an incident. That led her to become active in the community work. That led her to get a job at the Baltimore City Health Department to be trained as a phlebotomist, which charted her on her love of healthcare, although mine is injustice. And that led my mom to basically get involved in politics in terms of with multiple mayors, governors of the state of Maryland, and she passed in 2006, but before she passed, and I was talking to her one time in my office, and she was in Washington, and I said, well, why didn't you come to my office and see me? And she says, oh, I was politicking with Nancy Pelosi. And so what I'm saying is my mom, with just the lack of education, of formal education, and the disabilities and things that she had in her life, she was able to make a difference. And before she passed, it was before, obviously, President Obama had been elected, but there was still health care reform going on that she was able to, with her background, walk through the halls of Congress and advocate for them. So for me, I always say, not to any discredit to my dad, but my mom is totally my motivation, because I saw that when people say they could never do something, my mother had a saying for both me and my brother: we could never say never. If we even looked like we said, oh, that would never happen. I mean, she just really would roll her eyes and say, just don't say never. So my motivation in terms of this book and my pursuit of justice is, I don't accept never. I don't accept that things can't change. And I know that what my mom was able to accomplish, I can do even greater things, and so can anybody in this room.
You grew up in the Park Heights neighborhood of Baltimore. What inspired you to be a lawyer? Had you seen lawyers around you? Were there lawyers in your family?
So that's so interesting, because I have recently thought about this, and it's really going to sound like a backhanded compliment to someone, but no, I didn't know anyone in my family that was a lawyer. In my generation, meaning myself, my brother, my first cousins, we were the first ones in our family to attend college. or graduate school. So I didn't have that person to look up to. All that I really had was TV on the one hand, and I saw what a lot of people see in TV when they see lawyers, and that was my impression of being a lawyer. But the honest answer really is that when I went to college at University of Pennsylvania, I was actually in a joint program to get my master's and my bachelor's degree at the same time, and therefore I had a faculty advisor. She is someone who's famous now. Some of you may know her. It's Nell Painter, and she has books out now. And I told her that, oh, since what I knew was teachers, I want to be a history professor. I want to go ahead and get my PhD. I want to teach at a university or college just like how you're doing now. And honestly, she explained to me what that entailed. And I said, oh, I don't want to do that. And honestly, where I went to school, people were doing one of several things. They were either going to law school, medical school, or business school. Two of those three things were out for me, and I chose law school. That's the honest answer.
Honesty is the best answer. You go to law school, you become a prosecutor, you work in your hometown. You mentioned in the title of the book, a former prosecutor's quest for reform. And you mentioned in your introduction the power of prosecutors. You were an anomaly in the prosecutor's office. You were a woman, you were a black woman. The makeup of prosecutors in the DA and the state's office and local prosecutors, district attorneys, why does that matter?
Well, everything in terms of, which has now gotten a bad word, name, but everything in terms of diversity matters. It's like I could dream and see myself as a lawyer, but I never saw or knew of a black lawyer other than, you know, obviously there were politicians that were lawyers I knew growing up, but not basically knowing them. In every field, not just in the prosecutor's office, it is important that a diversity of faces and races and ethnicities and genders are represented in all facets of society. So when I prosecute, and this is figures that I just kind of sort of recently learned in terms of data, because we kind of take a lot of things for granted, those of us that live in this area of the district. But in reality, there are only today 2% black women lawyers in the United States. There's only 6 or 5% of all lawyers that are black that are in the United States. So we take that for granted, and myself too, because we live in an area where we see, but when you're looking at it on a scale of the United States, it's very sparse. So it is very important that in an office like the prosecutor's office, where people's lives are really at stake, and if their lives are not at stake, what's going to happen to them for the rest of their lives is at stake. Sometimes as young as 12, 13, or 14, that what's going to happen to them is determined by someone. In the U.S., in the state election, in the state prosecutor system, there are 2,400 elected local and state prosecutors. Here in the district, it would be the Attorney General, because the district is not a state. And of those 2,400 state and local elected prosecutors, who are the ones who are heading the offices and decide what policies and what we're going to do and what our laws, and some of us know all about that, what we're going to do, they're 95% white, and most of them are white men. And so it matters, diversity, and it matters because the people that are going through the offices, and this is later in the book, and you'd have to read a lot in it, by design, the people that are being prosecuted are black people. And so it is very important that, like I said, in all fields, but we're talking about prosecution, that the look of prosecutors that are in the offices, that they have the look and the face that I have.
You also mentioned in the book, and you know many folks may know this in the audience, many people may not know, but prosecutors are elected officials, many of them. And you said prosecutors are first politicians, and that has to be remembered. Expound on that.
Well, in my book, I'm talking about, we have state and we have federal. Federal prosecutors are not elected, they are appointed. But to give the broad picture, state and local elected prosecutors, that's who controls most of the cases. In the federal system, on a yearly basis, federal prosecutors in the U.S. handle roughly 79,000 cases. In the state and local system, which is where most of the prosecutions are occurring, 13 million cases annually come through that office. Those are only misdemeanors. And 80% of everything that comes through the state and local prosecutor's office are misdemeanors. So those 80%, 13 million, those are misdemeanor cases. And the state and local elected prosecutors, which is what I'm talking about in my book, they control everything that happens in their own jurisdiction. They have the sole power. But it's often a yin and a yang, to get to Bramante's question, because they are elected politicians. And so they have to serve, not to get into religion, but they have to serve two gods. They have to serve the people who put them into office, but they also have to serve the police officers who actually run people through the system that they are elected to serve.
So there's a dance that we see between police and prosecutors that I'm assuming through your experiences and that you touch on in the book that you have to have. And we all like partners where it's easy to dance, but that dance is not always easy, I'm going to assume.
Well, just by way of a little bit of background, the way the prosecution system works is that this is where it's a little different. And I love Law and Order, but this is where it's different than Law and Order. The prosecutors, for the most part, do not investigate cases. Yes, if it's a money case or something of that nature, and a major drug case, to a certain degree, yes. But the cases that most people hear about or see in the paper, or the crimes that you may come across on your listservs or whatever, those cases are developed and put together by the police officers. And the police officers then just hands me a case that's already had the witnesses investigated. Again, it's not like Law and Order where, to that extent they're working jointly together. But you're seeing, particularly when you're in misdemeanor, you're seeing a lot of the same police officers over and over and over again. And it becomes a fine line in terms of a dance that even if you believe or see something that doesn't quite sound right or smell right or whatever, these are people, they're not our coworkers, but these are people that we have to work with all the time, pretty much every day, not necessarily the same person, on our cases. So it becomes a fine line between that in terms of dancing and telling someone, I kind of don't think this smells right. I think that maybe this isn't right, because you're questioning their authority. It's just a very, very fine line. And most of the time, to really be quite honest, you don't really know what part of the story is true.
Every so often, I'll pull a couple quotes from the book, but you do have to buy the book. I'm not going to read that many quotes. But you wrote, Debbie, many black people's dreams die or their livelihoods suffer because they have been targeted by racist police officers, pulled into a racist system, and dropped into the lap of overburdened, undertrained prosecutors. And again, you were a one-time prosecutor.
Right.
Were you overburdened? Were you undertrained? And what was the effect of that, if that is true in your case?
So in my case, and there's studies that I have in the book, so it's not just off the top of my head of my own anecdotal experiences. But like I said, the system is overrun with 13 million misdemeanor nonviolent cases every year, which is 80% of the cases. And the way most prosecutors' offices are set up, we don't, regardless of your experience, we don't generally just start trying a murder case. I mean, we're trying the nuisance cases, the disorderly conduct cases, the urinating on the street cases, the opening a beer can while you're in the car cases. Those are the nonviolent type misdemeanors that I'm basically I'm talking about. And if you go, and I would recommend this to people, if you were to go to a misdemeanor courtroom today, downtown at Superior Court or in Montgomery County, if that's where you live, you will find, it may have changed a little bit only because some things are being done remote, but for the most part, you will find courtrooms that are full of people. And the way the prosecutor, and when I say full, you'll find a docket of 30, 35 people that are in on any particular day. And the way the prosecutor's offices are working is it's overburdened because we don't have, when I say we as a former prosecutor, we don't have the time to really go over in any detail about any case. There are people in here, I know more about you than I know, and I may know little about you, but I know more about you than I will know about someone who's just on my docket. Or there are days that I would be given a case file and told, Bramante didn't come in today. You're going to have to take his docket. Okay, because court just goes on. And so what that means is there are a lot of times that, you know, how can you be prepared for a case when you don't even know anything about it, but you're given a stack of 30 cases and you're just basically working with notes that some other person has had. That is pretty much the system throughout the U.S. When I prosecuted, I did not realize that was the system everywhere because I'm only dealing with what it was like for me to be in Baltimore. I do criminal defense now, so I do practice pretty much in all the counties in the state of Maryland, as well as in the district. But it is only when I did research for this book that I realized that system of overburden, too many cases, and it even happens in jurisdictions where they're smaller. Because one would think that logically, well, if it's a smaller jurisdiction, they're not going to have that many cases. It's not the District of Columbia. It's not Baltimore City. But I can tell you that when I'm down on the Eastern Shore, it's still a courtroom full of black people. So that doesn't change. And so therefore, the caseloads of the office doesn't change. Most prosecutor offices today, as well as when I was a prosecutor, we didn't have support staff. When I say we didn't have support staff, there's a lot of cases, but it's not like when I'm in private practice and we hire paralegals and we hire law clerks and we make sure we have support, but it's not there because that's not the way the prosecutor's office is set up. It's not set up truly to find justice or to get at the truth. It is basically to go in and get a conviction, and that doesn't take a lot of time.
You mentioned that the history, the prosecutorial history of America's DNA is still set in. I'm a history guy. So we're going to talk a little history. Hopefully you guys like history. As I ask all of my students, how many students like history? And I get about 2 or 3 hands that come up. I say, how many students hate history? Every hand goes up. So then I find a middle ground and I talk about something that's going on social media, and then I make my way. But in terms of what we're talking about, Debbie, in your book, connect the dots to America's history in terms of the criminal justice system to the present and how African Americans have been caught in that web.
So we could be here all night, but I'm going to make this very short. The thing that a lot of people don't want to hear about or discuss is the fact that everything in terms of Black Americans stems from the enslavement of Black Americans. And even with the Emancipation Proclamation, as soon as enslaved Black people were, quote unquote, free, then the legal system, the prosecutorial system, they created laws that were solely for Black people. Now, We can't do that technically right now today, but laws were created that were solely for black people, that were not there on the books for white people. And the purpose was to basically enslave black people back in prison, into slavery again. But we got past that, but then we moved into the Jim Crow era, where still it was just a very slippery slope for what would happen in terms of civil rights and your civil liberties. And we've gone from Jim Crow to 1994, for all due respect, but Bill Clinton did give us mass incarceration with the 1994 crime bill. And so we've gone from just one aspect or another. Ramonte said, I quote once in Mark Twain, and I do, because Mark Twain has what is believed to be a quote that's attributed to him that says that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does a lot of rhyming. So no one is saying that we're the same as picking cotton, which is what my mom did as a sharecropper, but we have gone through different phases to get to the same point almost, but rhyming just a little bit differently. And so where we are right now, as a result of we can't just put it on the 1994 crime bill, but where we are right now, just dating back to our country's DNA, we're back to a point where, again, we have millions of people that are in jail, waiting for bail, not having bail, waiting for a trial date, each and every year. So we're just never that far from our past. And one of the things that I do say, and I'm like Ramonte, I was a history major, even though I didn't go much further with it, is that we sometimes think that when we talk about in slavery, that is just so far away. Like, what would that have to do with 2024? Because we're just so, many people think we're so far removed from that. So I'll just give just one snippet in my book to make it kind of a little bit real, is that in 2020, I developed a whole new family of relatives because one of my cousins had done a lot of DNA genealogy, and she came across me, and literally I found out I had 200 relatives that I did not know anything about on my father's side. And one of those was Julia Wright, who I talk about, if not in the first chapter, in the introduction. And Julia was born 5 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. And she lived a really long time, so meaning she was born enslaved. She lived a really long time until 1952. But what that means is that everybody in here probably knows somebody, if not yourself, that was born at the same time that Julia, a formerly enslaved person, was walking this earth in 1952. We're not that far away from slavery.
You use the term white justice in the title of your book. How do you see that? What is it? How would you explain that?
What I see, and I go through in the book each and every aspect of the criminal justice system. So meaning, I go through from the beginning, from arrest, where black people are 10 times more likely to be arrested than a white person, although black people do not do 10 times as much crime as a white person. So I go from arrest, I go from that to bail. DC does not have a cash bail system. DC and only Illinois are the only two places, Illinois is the only state in the District of Columbia, are the only two places that do not have a cash bail system. And so I go through the fact that within a system where there's bail system, that routinely black people are denied bail, looking at everything equally, because there are studies on it, looking at everything equally, the same criminal record, the same crime that's committed, but white people are given a pass. Within the juvenile system, which is very disheartening to me, when I used to see juveniles that are in court, and I have represented juveniles, which are children. I mean, juvenile is the court word for it, they're children. In the juvenile court system, there are studies that show that for the same offense, that black kids are either cases are either held in adult court or they are prosecuted within the juvenile court system, versus white kids, again, with the same everything equal, so we're comparing apples to apples, that they're just sent home to mom or dad. And that just happens in every aspect of the criminal justice system. In terms of charges, black people are generally charged at higher crimes than white people. In terms of probation, black people are most likely, if they're going to be placed on probation, they're going to be placed on what's called supervised probation, which means they're going to have a whole long litany of things that they have to do to comply, versus white people are generally going to be given unsupervised probation, which means the only way that they're going to be able to trip up on probation is if they get a new arrest. So when I'm talking about white justice, and I go through a lot of it in a lot more detail than this, what I'm talking about is the fact that when we say, how would we make the criminal justice system be fair? And one of the people that's quoted in my book, she says, all we have to do is look at how we treat white people.
You mentioned, too, in your book when we were talking about probation, we often think, well, that's the way to go, take probation instead of going to jail. But that can kind of be tricky, too, right? Because certain times you have to stay in that probation state, and that just sort of continues that sort of vicious cycle of being tied to the judicial system, the criminal justice system for African Americans.
So here's the interesting thing about probation. With my naivete, when I was becoming a prosecutor and I was entering that office, I came into the office to help people. So I thought. I did not come into the office to keep people in jail, to come and convict people. I saw it as a way that I could get trial experience, which is what I wanted to do. But I thought I was helping people when I said, oh, we do plea bargain, just like you see on TV. I'm going to offer and recommend that you get probation. And to me, I just felt pat on the back that I'm doing something good. But in reality, the way the system is set up, all that probation does is position people to have one foot in the door in order to trip and fall and get to prison because of how the disparities work in the probation system. There's so many things that people have to do when they're on probation. It is exhausting, and I outline them in the book. I mean, you could be on probation and have 10 things that you have to do. When I'm saying things, I'm talking about on a weekly basis. Some of those things cost some money in terms of getting to the probation officer's office. And so any one of those things can trip a person up. And what I mean by that, the system doesn't always accept excuses of, I couldn't do that because I did not have money to get on the metro to go do that. And all that does is just set up people to just trip and fall into jail or a prison.
Let's talk a little bit about Freddie Gray. What happened there, and the DOJ report that came from that, and how that may give us a broad sense of the criminal justice system and why you see it needs to be reformed, especially from the prosecutor's point of view.
So in many of the cases, not just Freddie Gray's case, but in many of the police cases that we've heard about of things that happen to people, and at least it's over 20 some police jurisdictions where the Department of Justice will come in and they will evaluate and go through all the books and records.
We may need to tell folks, does everyone know about the Freddie Gray story in Baltimore? Okay, that's the journalist side of me. I always have to make sure folks know what we're talking.
So in a lot of cases, not just in Freddie Gray's case, but a lot of cases where there have been unarmed Black people killed at the hands of the police department, including the most recent one, which was, the most recent well-known one, which is Derek Chauvin, from George Floyd. The Department of Justice will come in. They will look at all all the records of the police department, including in the Freddie Gray case, the Baltimore Police Department, to see what's being done, what hasn't been done, where we can improve things. And it is from looking at those records that we get that glimmer of really how the police departments really work in some instances. And there are many things I point out in the book that came about because of that. And I just focus on that specific case because I'm from Baltimore, but it's happened in about, Louisiana, Detroit. It's happened in a lot of different cities. It's nothing that's just local to Baltimore and to Freddie Gray. But one of the things, just to give you an idea of how the police work, an example is that in the investigation of the Department of Justice, and it was a 500-page report that goes out to just say this is what's going on. The one thing that struck me is there is one instance where one of the shift commanders, so meaning a shift commander of a particular district, police district in Baltimore, when you have to fill out, and everybody knows about paperwork if you've been on any job, and the police are no different. They have paperwork they have to fill out. And one of the police offense reports, which is the arrest report that they have to make when a person is arrested, will have, the generic things, name, address, height, whatever. And in that commander's report, to make it easier for his officers to fill out the police report, where it says race and sex, he just inserted in the template black male. So that gives you some idea of what happens, and that is something that the Department of Justice found in going through the paperwork, as if every person that was going to be arrested, and certainly a large percentage of people that were going to be arrested were going to be black men. In Baltimore, and not unlike other places, what the Department of Justice also found out is that the percentage, and I was not a math person, but the percentage that of black men that were arrested in a particular district in Baltimore, something like 86%, that it was statistically impossible for that to be random. And that's what I talk about.
And that's where numbers are so important. Oftentimes we get overrun by numbers, but they really can paint a picture of an issue. In our time we have left before we go to the question and answer in the audience, a couple more things. Prosecutorial reforms. I mean, that's what the heart of your book, to say this is how we can do better. And obviously you can't give us everything, but give us just some ideas of some of the solutions that you think could make things move along the track that you think it should be in terms of prosecutorial justice.
So the thing I like to talk about universally in my book is, yes, there are things that the prosecutor can do, but there are things that each and every one of us can do in this room and elsewhere. And it doesn't matter whether you are 22 or 92. I outline things that everyone can do collectively. We cannot, there are things that the prosecutor has the power to just do tomorrow if they'd like to, but collectively, we as citizens who want to see justice, criminal justice in this country, there are things that we can push them along to do, because like we said in the beginning, in the jurisdictions where there are elected prosecutors, they're politicians. They have to be elected by us, the citizens who are voting them in. So in the book, although I have a chapter on prosecutors, I have 4 chapters that are devoted solely to reforms. And it's not looking at anything separate from the other. There are things, like I said, that prosecutors can do all on their own, but there are things that we all collectively can do with racial justice organizations that we ourselves can get more knowledge and information about, that we can do collectively in terms of pushing the needle, but it has to be a collaboration. That's the only reason why I'm not trying to, even though there is a chapter on what the prosecutors can do, I'm trying to paint what I feel is what I want people to do, and that is to work together. We can't rely on the work being done solely by prosecutors to create justice. But there are things, just to answer quickly your question, there are many people that are prosecuted because they have mental health. 50% of people in jail, they have mental health issues. So that's not to say they didn't commit a crime, but they have mental health issues. So jail isn't going to do anything for them. Same thing with substance abuse. There are people that have substance abuse issues. When I prosecuted on substance abuse issues, there were people that would say to me as a prosecutor, well, they have it bad for him, but he needs to just go to jail. What is that going to do? That just creates the revolving door that we basically have now. And so there are things that prosecutors can do in reform in those two areas that would be a tremendous help, because to send, and I've represented clients that have had mental health issues, and to be quite honest, a lot of them want to be in jail. I mean, because they have mental health issues, but that doesn't do anything to help them, to help us as a society to be safer. They, a lot of times people need help. Then one of the other things, just since you asked about the prosecutors, when we're talking about the majority of the offices are run by white prosecutors, we all tend to live within our communities. We have to kind of admit that that's just how it works. And what I would like to see is prosecutors go into the communities. I mean, we sent people, I say we as a former prosecutor, we sent defendants to go have community service. Oh, you have to get like 100 hours of community service. I think the same thing should be true for prosecutors. You can't prosecute people that you don't know. You can't just see them on TV or read about them in the paper of having committed a murder. I would recommend that prosecutors first start with going out into community. Instead of playing, we had softball leagues. I don't know if they still do, but instead of having a softball league with the public defender and the police department, go out there in the community, sweep some yards, do something there so that you can learn more about the social economic issues that people are coming from. I came from a community where I actually had murder cases as a prosecutor that were around the corner from where I grew up. But I know that area. Most white prosecutors don't know what it's like to live in those areas. So that would be what I would say, just generally speaking, about prosecutors.
Last two quick points. I wanted to see if we could squeeze in you talked about where you grew up and your family. Did you want to talk about your cousin Edward?
I think if that clock is right, I think we should take questions.
Is the clock right? All right. So questions now? Did you want to end on your hope, or we're going to let you say that?
I'll get that in with the questions.
Okay. So we'll open up the questions, and the microphone is where that gentleman is standing.
What do you think will be the effect of autonomous vehicles? Because I think that a lot of people that get arrested and into the criminal justice system, it has to do with cars, like speeding or something like that. And so all of a sudden there'll be no traffic courts anymore, and people will not see policemen as much because that's where people see policemen.
So your question is?
Do you agree that might have a big effect on the criminal justice system and also on discrimination as well?
So I think that from most of and I'll speak to this more in Maryland, most of the laws that are on the books in terms of traffic laws, they don't need to be there. I think that most people here would be surprised to know, because I certainly was when I prosecuted, to know that there are criminal traffic laws, and we're not talking about just driving while under the influence or driving intoxicated, but there's a whole section in Maryland of the transportation code that are criminal traffic laws. So I don't know if that would eliminate them, but I'm saying that I think that some of the laws that are already there do not need to be there, because people think like, oh, it's $50. Oh, I'll just pay a fine. Some of those things are criminal. Even though you haven't technically been arrested, and in Maryland they have a summons that they will give you, but a lot of the crimes that are traffic crimes, to answer your point in the traffic, they just don't need to be on the books, because most people don't realize the issue with them on the books because you only paid a $150 fine.
Any other questions? The mic is open.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the first part of your talk, but I know in Maryland recently there was a big change where they set up an independent commission to investigate police crimes. And I know there was pushback from the police, or from the prosecutors and the police. So do you think that's a potential reform in other places? And what do you think that pushback was all about? And do you think the commission is a good idea?
So I don't know specifically about the commission, but I think that anything where there's oversight of both prosecutors and police is a very good thing, because there's oversight on all of our jobs. I mean, we don't just get to do our jobs and not have oversight, whether you want to call it if you're not, Elon Musk or something, you have oversight on your job. And so I think the pushback is the part that we were talking about earlier when we were saying that there's this tight dance between police and prosecutors. And so one doesn't get to do the job without the other one. But when I say in terms of reform, is that if we are all collaboratively working together, that is where the push is on our side.
Okay, so the independence would help that process, right? That it's an independent commission?
Yes.
And it's not beholden to one side or the
Correct.
other?
Correct.
Okay. Do you think other states will adopt that?
There are, everything that I talk about in the book, it's being done some way, shape, or form in other jurisdictions. Okay. So yes, that's already being done in other places. Good. It's not, it's just that it's a hard push to get it to be done in 50 states and the District of Columbia.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry. I wanted to ask for your take on, so in DC, right, we have this kind of massive crime omnibus bill that just was passed, right? Kind of responding to a lot of people's worries about this, unprecedented spike in crime. Right, a lot of the solutions we know don't work. But people are afraid. There's, pressure on elected officials to do something, so they revert back to these kind of tough on crime approaches. I was curious in hearing from you, from your experience, what are some approaches that you've seen work really, really well that could be useful in times like, or in situations like these?
Sure. So in 25 to 28 states, they have some form of what is called restorative justice, and it's been around for a very long time. And within restorative justice, it looks at the person, meaning the defendant or the person that would be charged with a crime, as a whole person, not as someone that carjacked a 16 years old black male, because that's how we looked at it as a prosecutor. Nothing more, nothing less. And so restorative justice works towards trying to look and see what help a person needs. What do they need in terms of help? Not looking at it as jail, prison, or probation. Those are the options, or dismissal. Those are the options that we have right now. Jail, prison, dismissal, or probation. And it looks at just treating the whole person. And in the areas where there have been restorative justice or diversionary practices, they have proven that those individuals do not go back into the community and commit crime. So it's the reverse of what we think. When we think we need more crimes, more jail time, more prison time, and that will make us safer because crime is is off the roof. That does not, and the studies show, that does not make us any safer. We spend billions. If it would have, it would have already have done it.
My question really is around juvenile justice. And we hear a lot about carjackings, we hear a lot about snatch and grabs and things of that nature. I know there's a lot of discussion going on between sending juveniles into the adult male population in prisons and treating them separately. Could you give me like 3 things you think should happen to improve the entire juvenile justice system, such that a person that's 14 or whatever isn't tagged for the rest of their life by committing what we see as a crime today?
So in the juvenile justice system, that's where there's such a great racial disparity, because the vast majority of people who are prosecuted as juveniles children in the adult court or in the juvenile court system are black kids. And so what I'm saying is, which I think I've said before, we want to know what we can do to do something different, do the same thing that we're already are doing to white kids that are charged with the same types of crime. And that is to get them the help that they need. If they need treatment, they need treatment. If they need some other support that their family needs. But those things are already being done. They're just not being done with the vast majority of black kids. So in that instance, it's not about reinventing the wheel. It is about doing the same thing for black kids and brown kids that we already are doing for white kids. Nothing more, nothing less.
I read Michelle Alexander's book, and I agree with it. All that. Do you, and I agree with both of you. I'm not a history guy, but I believe in history, and history matters.
Yes.
And so to me, I'm not. I mean, are you up? I'm a pessimist on the United States because I don't see America changing. I've seen the evolution from slavery, to Jim Crow, to the civil rights movement in the '60s, and on and on and on. So structurally, it seems to me it's still a long way to go. Do you agree?
No, I do not agree.
Okay.
And the reason why I don't agree is how I started in the beginning, because of my mom. My mom also had another saying, which was not just knowledge is key, but her other saying, which is how I end this book, is that you have to have hope. When I would try to give up on anything, as even growing up, how much could you be giving up then? I mean, she would always say, you have to have hope. And so when I look at her life and what she accomplished in her life, and many other people like her, I know that there is hope. We just collectively need to believe that there is hope, and we need to all work in some small measure. If we all just work in some small measure for reform, there will be changes. And so even though, yes, it seems that things are the same, that things are rhyming, things have not stayed the same. And there is an immense amount of hope. And that is where I want to end, that there is always hope.
Perfect place to close. Great final question. I didn't have to ask it. Debbie Hines, Get Off My Neck, Black Lives, White Justice, and a Former Prosecutor's Quest for Reform. Debbie, thank you so much. Great conversation. And we thank you